My talk might be also a little bit different of what everything you heard already today, as I will present not the traditional solving problem approach, but I was inspired by two words of the theme of this meeting: resilience, one hand, and digital, on the other hand. So I'm now working, as the chairman already said, for about 3 years as a private person, because now I am considered to have time to do what I like to do. The geometry of that famous basilica of Assisi. We heard a lot of geometry already today. And as I will prove it, and it is written in all kinds of documents, that geometry of historic buildings should be seen as the initial geometry. That means the way the initial architect or master designer designed with the geometry of his time, with the tangible aspects. That means the measure he or she, well, he was using, and that is not, of course, our meter or centimeter, but in most of Europe, the foot, as well as the intangible dimension. That means all kind of symbolic and other intentions which were to be seen and to be understood by the, at that time, in this case, 13th century society. Of course, we are all forgotten, or not forgotten, we never were informed about the way he or she was thinking about that. And we all have heard during our education that everything was mainly determined by so-called beauty, but what is considered beauty at that time? What is the real proportion that the architect or the designer should apply? Well, that is the thing that we should try to rediscover. And I was also thinking, what is this? This makes sense for a public which is mainly constructional engineers, which is not so much intended to the resilience, the traditional meaning of the word resilience, which means mainly recuperation of natural disasters. But also, and that is also for this case of Assisi, important, as it is resilience of not a single building, but a resilience of an whole the whole city. Most of you maybe know the city of Assisi, which is, well, becoming always more and more a kind of religious sanctuary, and not anymore a living city as it has been intended. So for that reason also it's important to know what is behind all these aspects of architecture. And well, I try to summarize a little bit what you could read with me. The building is 1800 years old, and is not documented by nothing. Of course, in all tourist guides, you feel a lot of pages, but always about the frescoes inside the building. Giotto and other people. I have now, being in Assisi for about 3 years, I have never heard up to now any tourist guide explaining something about the architecture. It was always about the designs and about the frescoes, and of course, they are unique and they are very important. So my intention is to contribute a little bit on this aspect without, as I said, without, as you always have with those old things, esoteric or Kabbalistic comments, which says that should mind this or that. The approach is also an old-fashioned one, in that sense that, I am retired, so I am an old-fashioned education, in that sense that I follow what is one of the major funders of modern restoration philosophy, the French architect Viollet-le-Duc. Viollet-le-Duc, who said, well, you should put you in the shoes of the initial architect. And then, of course, then you try, and he did also create as he should have been created. We know this is open for a lot of comments, and I will not enter in that. But I tried to make a kind of inverse logic. So what if you get today the commission to create a sepulchral church for what is considered a very important person at that moment? How should you approach to that? You must say, we are speaking about 1220. So that's the end of Romanesque church, and also this church is considered the very first one for the Italian situation, the very first with some kind of Gothic characters. Although Gothic was in French already 100 years old. But anyway, why is that generated in this way? And to say something about the facts, you should know that we speak about two churches, one above the other, which have been created in different projects, because most of the people think this has been created in one. This is not the case. Well, that's my opinion, because I can prove that with all kind of archaeological findings. And there is a third church which has been added only at the end of the beginning of 19th century, which is the Crypt, where the real tomb of the saint is situated. And you see here, that's what we call the lower basilica, or the lower church, because we call it always basilica, but it is not a basilica. The very first problem is already the plan. The plan is an one aula Hallenkirche, as they say in German language, and the upper basilica, which was conceived about 4 or 5 years later, followed only what was already existing, and as it was traditional way to operate, they first put this one, and then as a kind of stolp, as a kind of glass covering, they created the second basilica, second church. What I said, the sources. There is no archive, nothing available. We have only, well, the architect of you will know, of course, Vitruvius, which was at that moment the only written book available. There is Villard de Honnecourt, is a little bit more, 100 pages of sketches only. And there is the Bible. You say, what has the Bible to do with that? Well, the Bible has a lot of things to do with that. In the years 1200, because the early Franciscan friars tried to, as we will see, kind of copy the one thing, the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem, partly at least, and you heard this morning about one element of it. And secondly, the old temple of Salomon, of King Salomon, which is, of course, not existing anymore, but is written in, I think, about 5 lines, more or less, in the Bible. But they give also the dimensions, and this was the reason why it was used. So, but as I said, the geometry is one of the major problems, as we should translate it as it was seen at that way. And in some way, Assisi is lucky, as the initial early medieval dimensions are on the Belfort. And you say here, well, even the major brick formats and the length of the of what was usable at that way. But it's very misleading, because this all the dimensions, if you translate that in modern, or if you translate the modern dimensions in these old ones, you come nowhere. So I tried to look the other way. The church was commissioned by the Pope, so that was always Roman food, and you see the difference is about a double. The Assisian food is about 50 centimeters. The Roman food is 30 centimeters. You have the biblical cubitus is 45 centimeters. And you could even use the early French king dimension, which is also about 52 centimeters. So what we did is, thanks to the digital photogrammetric plans we had, by iterating all the problems, all the possibilities, and so we discovered that everything has been done according to the Roman food, although here, as you see, it is indicated on another way, but this is the reality. Of course, we cannot enter in all the history of the building, and it is not necessary, but it is important to know that thanks to the old conversion of these measurements, that we could discover that it is here. You have 3 squares, thank you. Squares that which are 40 by 40 feet, Roman feet. As it was also very tradition to have very simple and single values. It is about, as you can see, 11 meters 76. That corresponds with 40 feet. And of course, as you measure it with a photogrammetric dimension, you have everything is different. You have to make the average, of course, to all the dimensions. And also we could discover that, and this is the reason why these 3-lob columns here have been added in a second phase, as we will show you another photo of what it was before. That's one thing. Second thing, that you have twice what it is called the hecatombeton. That means 40 feet, and the total should be 100 feet, or a double, or even there are other ones which are 4 times. But anyway, a very easy way. So the width of the transept is 100 feet. The length of that is 200 feet. That is also 100 feet. And the dimensions, the proportion, or well, the classical proportion of the golden the section, as you all be familiar with it. The same thing for the upper church, which was initially also only 3 base, and the fourth bay has been added in a later period. Not that much later, but about 50 years later. And you see also that they managed a little bit, not so very precisely, as the dimensions are quite different. Another thing which is important in this interpretation is that you should not work as we work now. That means we take the axe of the columns or the axe of the base. No, you have only to calculate the free dimensions. And only in this case you arrive at 3 times 4t. Otherwise you have always different situations. The planimetry is, as you could see here, very simple. Ad quadratum, this is the old Latin way of projecting, of designing. And everything is ad quadratum. Even the later additions, because this entrance bay is an addition of beginning of 14th century, is also ad quadratum. And that is also, well, but you see also that the quadratum is a little bit bigger, that one, as the other ones. But anyway, the idea was to create the quadratum. It's already at the end. And the upside is at triangulum. This also is only something which can be discovered by translating that only starting from the old dimensions. So that if I can suggest to all, we heard a lot of the in conception project, that it should be also, when you speak about geometry, that you could specify the historic geometry. An interesting point that also the place of the tomb of the St. Francis is precisely in the circle, according to the 19th century project, the 19th century project of Logier took, of course, interesting copy of this old system to evaluate that situation. Another aspect we cannot enter is that there is a copy of the Lateran front side of the Basilica of Rome, which we can develop here from the very complex foundation structure in this case. As I said, copy of Salomon type, King Salomon's, with 3 levels, and also this is, well, about the Temple of Salomon, there are all 100 interpretations, of course, but this is considered as one of the most possible ones, and of course a modern one, but you see these are the 3 3-lob columns which have been added, and that have been added later is proven by the difference of the stone, and also by the difference of the joints. So that is the same thing. I have to hurry up. Is that also maybe we could understand this a kind of pre-antisysmic situation. As I said, 800 years old. They are registered about at least about 30 heavy earthquakes from 1300 to today, which have been collapsing the full church of the other cathedral of Santa Maria degli Angeli. But this has never been damaged. Only at 97, so about 20 years ago, because in the late 50s, the regional administration put a kind of concrete reinforcement above the the walls, which have been obviously not be compatible with the situation. Structural calculation, well, we cannot enter that, but of course there was no calculation, there was no normative. Decided everything on behalf of the proportional system of very simple, as you see here. Example, the thickness of the choir wall should be 1/5 of the modulus multiplied by 1/3. And this is the rule I hold from Villard de Honnecourt. So this is a 13th century situation. And that, because the only thing that which was calculated was the thickness of the wall. Other things were not known. Also, the project of the facade is full of geometric, and I must say, this is not Kabbalistic theory. This is only geometry of the circle, the square, the triangle, and these are the three basic, which are full of symbolism, of course. The circle is an unendless line without beginning, without end, so that's the symbol of God. Even the entrance is projected in this way. So this is the final project, which, as I was asked, the declaration, resilience of built heritage follows the knowledge and appropriate conservation measures with the translation of the historic documentation into modern documentation. Thank you.